The dust rose in thick clouds as Caroline Mitchell drove the last of the stubborn cattle toward the northern pasture, her muscles aching from 12 straight hours in the saddle under the relentless Wyoming sun of 1882. She had arrived at the Double R Ranch 6 months ago with nothing but a worn saddle, a good horse, and a determination that burned hotter than the summer heat, knowing full well that every man on the ranch would resent her presence from the moment she stepped foot on the property. The foreman, old Pete Henderson, had died suddenly of a heart condition 2 weeks prior, and the ranch owner, Thomas Rutherford, had called all the hands together that morning to announce his decision about the promotion that every cowboy on the ranch had been vying for. Caroline wiped the sweat from her brows as she rode back toward the main compound, her chestnut mare moving with the easy grace of an animal that trusted its rider completely. She could see the other ranch hands gathered near the bunkhouse, their faces turned toward the big house where Thomas Rutherford stood on the porch with his foreman's hat in his weathered hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs because she knew what was coming. Had known it since yesterday when Mr. Rutherford had pulled her aside after she had successfully delivered a breeched calf that would have died without her quick thinking and steady hands. The ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of prime grazing land in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains, and it took 30 hands to keep it running smoothly during the busy season. Caroline had learned every inch of that land in the past 6 months, had proven herself capable of any task thrown her way, from breaking horses to mending fences to tracking down strays in terrain that would challenge even the most experienced cowboy. She had grown up on a small ranch in Texas before her father died, and creditors took everything, forcing her mother and younger siblings to move east to live with relatives, while Caroline struck out on her own to make her fortune in the territories. As she dismounted and tied her horse to the rail, she caught the eye of Jake Morrison, the tall, broad-shouldered cowboy who had been working the Double R for 5 years and was the clear favorite among the men to take over as foreman. He stood apart from the others, his hat pulled low over his eyes, his expression unreadable as he watched her approach. Jake had never been unkind to her like some of the others, but he had never been particularly friendly either, maintaining a professional distance that she had appreciated even as she wondered what thoughts moved behind those storm-gray eyes. Thomas Rutherford cleared his throat, and the murmuring among the men died down immediately. He was a fair man in his late 50s, weathered by decades of hard work and honest dealing, and every person on his ranch respected him deeply. His wife had passed on 3 years ago, and his only son was back east studying law, leaving him to run the operation with the help of his hired hands. He looked out over the assembled cowboys with a grave expression that suggested he understood the weight of what he was about to announce. "I know you have all been wondering who I would choose to replace Pete as foreman," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "It was not an easy decision. We have many capable men here, men who have given years of loyal service to this ranch." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the crowd before it settled on Caroline, who stood at the back of the group, her hat in her hands and her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. But capability and loyalty are not the only qualities a foreman needs. A foreman needs vision, intelligence, the ability to think on their feet and solve problems before they become disasters. A foreman needs to care about this land and these animals as if they were their own. Caroline felt every eye turn toward her, felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure against her skin. Her mouth went dry, but she kept her chin up and her expression neutral, refusing to show weakness even as her stomach churned with nervous anticipation. Caroline Mitchell has demonstrated all of those qualities and more in the 6 months she has been with us, Thomas continued. She saved 3 calves during that late freeze in April. She tracked down those rustlers who were hitting our eastern boundary and got our cattle back without a shot fired. She broke that black stallion that threw 4 of our best riders, and she did it with patience and skill instead of brutality. She has earned the respect of this land and these animals, and she has earned my respect as well. He held up the foreman's hat, the leather band worn smooth by Pete Henderson's hands over the years. "Caroline Mitchell, I am promoting you to foreman of the Double R Ranch, effective immediately. You have earned it fair and square, and I will hear no complaints about this decision." The silence that followed was deafening. Caroline felt her legs carry her forward as if moving of their own accord, felt her hand reach out to accept the hat that Thomas extended to her. Her fingers trembled slightly as they closed around the worn leather, and she had to swallow twice before she could find her voice. "Thank you, sir," she managed, her words barely above a whisper. "I will not let you down." "I know you would not," Thomas said firmly, and then he turned to address the assembled hands once more. "Miss Mitchell is your foreman now, and you will treat her with the same respect you showed Pete. Anyone who has a problem with that can collect their pay and ride out today. Otherwise, I expect every one of you to follow her orders as you would follow mine. Are we clear?" A ragged chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. Though Caroline could see the resentment burning in many eyes, could feel the anger radiating from men who believed they had been passed over unfairly. But when she looked at Jake Morrison, she saw something different in his expression, something that looked almost like approval mixed with curiosity. He stepped forward from the group, and every head turned to watch him, waiting to see if the most respected cowboy on the ranch would accept this decision or challenge it. Jake walked up to where Caroline stood beside Thomas, and for a long moment he simply looked at her with those penetrating gray eyes. Then he reached up and removed his own hat, holding it respectfully against his chest as he extended his other hand to her. "Congratulations, Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "You earned it fair and square now, and anyone who says different will have to answer to me." Caroline felt something shift in her chest as she clasped his calloused hand, felt the strength and warmth of his grip, and saw the honesty in his eyes. Jake Morrison was not a man who gave empty compliments or false praise, and his public endorsement of her promotion carried more weight with the other hands than any decree from the ranch owner. She saw the tension ease slightly in the crowd, saw some of the hostile expressions soften into grudging acceptance. "Thank you, Jake," she said quietly. "That means a great deal coming from you." He nodded once, then settled his hat back on his head and turned to face the other cowboys. "You all heard Mr. Rutherford. Miss Mitchell is the foreman now, which means she is the boss. I expect every man here to give her the same loyalty and respect we gave Pete, because that is what this ranch deserves, and that is what she deserves. Anyone who cannot do that can ride out with me, watching to make sure they leave peacefully." The threat was subtle but clear, and Caroline saw more than one cowboy straighten up and rearrange his expression into something more neutral. Jake Morrison had a reputation as a fair man, but also as someone you did not want to cross, and his support would make her transition into this role significantly smoother than it might have been otherwise. Thomas Rutherford looked satisfied as he clapped Caroline on the shoulder. "Your first task as foreman is to oversee the drive to the summer pastures starting next week. We have 200 head that need to be moved to higher ground before the heat sets in, and I trust you to organize the logistics and lead the operation. Take whoever you need and make sure it gets done safely and efficiently." Caroline nodded, her mind already racing through the details of what would need to be arranged. "Yes, sir, I will start planning immediately." As the crowd dispersed, some of the men heading back to their duties while others lingered to talk in low voices, Caroline found herself standing alone on the porch with the foreman's hat still clutched in her hands. The weight of responsibility settled over her shoulders like a physical burden, but beneath the nervousness and uncertainty, she felt a fierce pride burning in her chest. She had worked harder than anyone else, had proven herself repeatedly, and now she had earned recognition for that effort. "Do not let them see you doubt yourself." Jake Morrison's voice came from beside her, startling her slightly. She had not heard him approach, his movements quiet despite his size. He leaned against the porch railing, his arms crossed over his chest, as he studied her with that same unreadable expression. "They will be watching for any sign of weakness, any excuse to say you are not capable of handling this job. You cannot give them that excuse." Caroline turned to face him fully, searching his features for any hint of mockery or resentment. "Why are you helping me? You could have had this position yourself. Everyone knows you were the obvious choice before I came along." Jake was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting out over the ranch land that stretched toward the mountains in the distance. I was the obvious choice because I have been here the longest and because I am good at what I do, he said finally. But being good at the work and being good at leading people are two different things. I saw how you handled that situation with the rustlers, how you talked them down and found a solution that did not end in bloodshed. I saw how you worked with that black stallion, how you understood what he needed instead of just trying to break his spirit. Pete was a good foreman because he cared about more than just getting the job done. He cared about doing it right, about taking care of the land and the animals and the people. You have that same quality, Miss Mitchell, and that is why you are a better choice than I would have been. His honesty took her by surprise, and Caroline felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that had nothing to do with pride or accomplishment. She studied Jake's profile as he gazed out at the land, took in the strong line of his jaw and the weathered tan of his skin and the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it touched his collar. He was a handsome man, she realized, though she had been too focused on survival and proving herself to notice before now. I appreciate your support, she said softly, and your honesty. I am going to need help from someone who knows this ranch and these men better than I do. Would you be willing to work with me to be my second in command during this transition? Jake turned his head to look at her, and something flickered in his gray eyes, something that might have been surprise or pleasure or both. I would be honored, Miss Mitchell, though if we are going to be working closely together, maybe you should call me Jake instead of Mr. Morrison. A small smile tugged at the corner of Caroline's mouth. Only if you call me Caroline instead of Miss Mitchell when we are not in front of the men. He returned her smile with a slight upturn of his lips that transformed his usually serious expression. That seems like a fair trade, Caroline. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Caroline threw herself into preparing for the cattle drive. She rose before dawn each day to review the maps and plan the route. Checking water sources and camping spots along the way, she selected 10 men to accompany her on the drive, choosing based on skill and temperament rather than seniority, which earned her some grumbling but also grudging respect when the men she chose proved to be exactly the right team for the job. Jake worked beside her throughout the preparations, offering advice when asked but never undermining her authority, and she found herself increasingly grateful for his steady presence and deep knowledge of the ranch operations. They also found themselves talking during the long evenings as they worked through the logistics, conversations that started with ranch business but gradually expanded to include more personal topics. Caroline learned that Jake had grown up in Montana, the son of a farmer who lost everything in a bad winter when Jake was 16. He had worked his way south, taking whatever jobs he could find until he landed at the Double R 5 years ago, and finally found a place that felt like home. He spoke about the land with a reverence that matched her own, and she realized they shared a deep understanding of what it meant to work with nature instead of trying to conquer it. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before she could walk, and spending every possible moment helping her father with the ranch work instead of learning domestic skills like her mother wanted. She told him about the devastation of losing her father and then losing the only home she had ever known, about the determination that had driven her to strike out on her own despite knowing how difficult it would be for a woman to find work in a man's profession. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," Jake said one evening, as they sat on the corral fence watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. His voice was quiet but intense, and when Caroline turned to look at him, she found his gray eyes fixed on her with an expression that made her breath catch in her throat. "What you have done, coming out here alone and proving yourself in the face of all that opposition that takes more courage than anything I've ever done." "I did not have a choice," Caroline said, though her voice came out softer than she intended. "I had to survive. I had to make a way for myself." "You had a choice," Jake countered gently. "You could have gone east with your family, could have found work as a seamstress or a teacher or married some town clerk who would have provided for you, but you chose this life because it is who you are, not because it was easy or safe. That is courage, Caroline. That is strength." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. felt her heart beating faster as the space between them seemed to shrink despite neither of them moving. There was something in the air, something electric and unnamed that made her acutely aware of every detail about the man sitting beside her, from the way his shoulder nearly touched hers to the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. "Jake," she began, but she did not know how to finish that sentence, did not know what she wanted to say or ask or acknowledge. He seemed to understand her confusion because he reached over and gently took her hand, his rough fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt both thrilling and perfectly natural. "I know this is complicated," he said quietly. "I know you are my boss now, and that changes things between us, but I need you to know that I admire you, Carolyn, not just as a foreman or a ranch hand, but as a person. You are remarkable, and spending these evenings with you has been the best part of my days." Caroline's breath caught in her throat as she looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity burning there, saw the hope and the hesitation and the desire that he was trying to keep in check out of respect for her position. She knew she should pull her hand away, should maintain professional boundaries, and not complicate the already difficult situation she was navigating. But her heart was pounding, and her skin felt alive everywhere he touched her, and she realized that she had been falling for Jake Morrison for weeks without even admitting it to herself. "You are remarkable too," she whispered, "and these evenings have been the best part of my days as well." The smile that spread across Jake's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his usually serious features into something warm and open and beautiful. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender that it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. They sat there together as full darkness fell, hands clasped and shoulders touching, neither of them speaking because words seemed insufficient for what was passing between them in the quiet evening air. The cattle drive began 3 days later with 200 head of beef cattle and 10 cowboys who ranged from grudgingly cooperative to openly enthusiastic about following Caroline's leadership. Jake rode beside her at the front of the column, helping to navigate the terrain and manage the herd, while the other hands spread out in their assigned positions to keep the cattle moving in the right direction. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as they pushed north toward the higher pastures, and Carolyn was grateful for every ounce of experience she had gained during her months on the ranch. The first day went smoothly, with the cattle settling into the rhythm of the drive and the men working together with reasonable efficiency. They made camp that evening near a creek that provided fresh water for both the animals and the cowboys, and Caroline oversaw the setup with quiet confidence, making sure the watch rotation was organized and the cattle were properly contained for the night. She noticed several of the hands watching her with less hostility than before, their expressions thoughtful as they evaluated her leadership in action. The trouble came on the second day when they reached a narrow pass between two rocky outcroppings that would require careful management to get the cattle through safely. Caroline was studying the terrain and planning her approach when one of the cowboys, a surly man named Dutch Harrigan, who had made no secret of his resentment over her promotion, rode up beside her with a sneer on his weathered face. "This is a bad route," he announced loudly enough for several other hands to hear. "A real foreman would have known to go around through the Eastern Valley. We are going to lose animals trying to push them through this pass." Caroline kept her expression neutral as she turned to face him, though her jaw tightened at the challenge in his voice. "The Eastern Valley adds 2 extra days to the drive, and Mr. Rutherford was clear that we need to get these cattle to the summer pasture before the heat wave that is predicted for next week. This pass is narrow but manageable if we take it slow and keep the cattle calm. We will send scouts through first to make sure there are no obstacles, then move the herd through in smaller groups." "That is a fool's plan," Dutch shot back. "Those cattle will spook in the close quarters, and we will have a stampede on our hands, but I guess that is what happens when you put a woman in charge of a man's job. She does not have the experience to know better." Caroline felt anger flash hot through her veins, but before she could respond, Jake's horse moved between hers and Dutch's, his gray eyes gone cold and hard as winter stone. "You got something to say about the foreman's orders, Dutch?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge of warning. Because from where I am sitting, her plan makes perfect sense, and the only fool here is the man questioning her judgment based on her gender instead of her ability. Dutch's face flushed red, but he held his ground. I have been working cattle drives for 15 years, Morrison. I know what I am talking about. Then you should know that Caroline's approach is exactly what Pete would have done in this situation, Jake countered. But if you think you know better, you are welcome to ride out and find work elsewhere. Otherwise, you follow the foreman's orders like the rest of us, and you keep your complaints to yourself. Are we clear? The two men stared at each other for a long moment, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Dutch jerked his head in a nod and wheeled his horse around, riding back to his position without another word. Jake turned to Caroline, his expression softening slightly as he met her eyes. You did not need me to fight that battle for you, he said quietly. I'm sorry if I overstepped. Caroline shook her head, torn between gratitude and frustration. I appreciate your support, but you are right that I need to handle these challenges myself if I'm going to earn their respect. Next time, let me deal with it first. Next time I will, Jake promised, but I am not going to stand by and let someone disrespect you, Caroline, not when you are doing everything right. She held his gaze for a moment, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his eyes and feeling that same warm sensation unfurling in her chest again. Thank you, she said softly, for believing in me. Always, Horror, he replied, and the simple word carried the weight of a more significant promise. They moved the cattle through the pass exactly as Caroline had planned, taking it slow and steady with scouts checking the route ahead and the herd divided into manageable groups. Not a single animal was lost, and by the time they emerged on the other side, even Dutch Harrigan seemed grudgingly impressed by how smoothly the operation had gone. Caroline allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction as they made camp that evening, knowing that she had proven her competence in a concrete way that would be harder for the skeptics to dismiss. That night, after the camp had settled and most of the men had rolled into their bedrolls, Caroline found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She walked out beyond the circle of firelight to where the land opened up into a vista of rolling hills silhouetted against a sky absolutely blazing with stars. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage and prairie grass, and she breathed it in deeply, feeling the tension slowly drain from her shoulders. Could not sleep either? Jake's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him approaching through the darkness, his hat in his hands and his hair slightly mussed from lying down. Too much on my mind, Caroline admitted, replaying every decision, wondering what else might go wrong, thinking about what I will do if I fail. You are not going to fail, Jake said with absolute certainty as he came to stand beside her. You have not put a foot wrong this entire drive. The men are starting to see what I saw from the beginning, that you know exactly what you are doing and you care about doing it right. Carolyn turned to face him fully, and in the starlight his features looked softer, more open than they did in the harsh light of day. Why do you have so much faith in me? She asked quietly. You barely know me, Jake. We have only been working together for a few weeks. He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if trying to decide how much to reveal. I recognize something in you, he said finally, a kind of determination and integrity that is rare in this world. You do not cut corners or look for easy answers. You face challenges head on and you care about the people and animals in your charge. That is who you are at your core, Caroline, and that is why I believe in you. It is also why I am falling in love with you, though I know the timing is terrible and the situation is complicated. Caroline's heart seemed to stop and then restart at double speed, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at him in shock. Jake, she whispered, his name barely audible over the night sounds of the prairie. You cannot say things like that. I am your boss now. This is impossible. I know, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know all the reasons why this is a bad idea, but I also know that what I feel for you is real, and I cannot keep pretending otherwise. I am not asking you for anything, Caroline, I am not expecting you to feel the same way or trying to complicate your life further. I just needed you to know the truth, to understand why I support you so fiercely and why I will continue to do so regardless of what you decide about us." Caroline felt tears sting her eyes as she looked at this good, honest man who had shown her nothing but respect and support from the moment she received her promotion. She thought about the conversations they had shared, the way her heart lifted every time she saw him, the sense of rightness she felt when they worked together. She had been so focused on proving herself and maintaining her authority that she had tried to ignore the growing feelings in her heart. But standing here under the vast Wyoming sky with Jake looking at her like she was something precious and rare, she could not deny the truth any longer. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, the words feeling like both a confession and a liberation. "I have been trying not to, trying to keep everything professional and proper, but my heart does not seem to care about what is practical or appropriate. When I am with you, I feel like I can breathe, like I do not have to be strong and capable every single moment. You see me, Jake, not just the ranch hand or the foreman, but me, and that means everything." The expression on Jake's face was one of wonder mixed with relief, and he reached out slowly to cup her cheek with his calloused hand, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she leaned into his touch instead, he made a sound low in his throat and stepped closer, his other hand coming up to frame her face as he looked down at her with so much emotion in his eyes that it made her chest ache. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and Caroline felt her heart overflow at the fact that even now, even after she had confessed her feelings, he was still asking permission and respecting her choice. "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and seeking and perfect. The kiss started soft and careful, a tender exploration that made Caroline's knees weak and her hands reach up to grip Jake's shirt to steady herself. But as she responded, as she rose up on her toes and parted her lips against his, the kiss deepened into something more passionate and desperate. All the feelings they had been holding back pouring out in the connection of their mouths and the press of their bodies. Jake's arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest, and Caroline felt safe and desired and cherished in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers and let out a shaky laugh. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Every time you smiled at me or said my name, I wanted to kiss you. You have been driving me crazy, Caroline Mitchell." She laughed too, the sound bright and happy in the darkness. "The feeling is entirely mutual, Jake Morrison. But we are going to have to be careful. I cannot afford to have the men think I am playing favorites or that I gave you special treatment because of personal feelings. This job is too important and I worked too hard to get here." "I understand," Jake said seriously, pulling back slightly so he could see her face. "We keep this between us for now, maintain professionalism in front of the others. But, Caroline, I want you to know that I am in this for the long term. This is not some passing fancy or a momentary attraction. I want to build a life with you. If you will have me, I want to stand beside you as you run this ranch and support your dreams and wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life." Tears spilled down Caroline's cheeks at the raw honesty in his words, at the vision of a future she had not let herself imagine, because it seemed too impossible and too wonderful. "I want that too," she whispered, "more than anything. But let us get through this drive first. Let me prove myself completely as foreman. Then we can figure out how to make this work." Jake nodded and pressed one more soft kiss to her lips before reluctantly releasing her. "We should get back before someone notices we are both gone and starts asking questions." They walked back to camp separately, but Caroline felt like she was floating, her heart so full of joy and hope that she could barely contain it. She lay in her bedroll staring up at the stars and thinking about Jake's words, about the possibility of a future where she could have both the career she had fought so hard for and the love she had never expected to find. The rest of the drive passed without major incident, though Caroline faced several smaller challenges that tested her problem-solving skills and her authority. Each time she handled the situation with confidence and competence, and she noticed the respect in the men's eyes growing day by day. Jake kept his promise to let her fight her own battles while still providing support and advice when she needed it. And the balance between their professional relationship and their private feelings was a delicate dance that somehow worked. They reached the summer pastures a full day ahead of schedule, and Carolyn oversaw the settling of the cattle with quiet satisfaction. The grazing land stretched out lush and green in the higher elevation, and the animals immediately began spreading out to feed, their contentment evident in their calm behavior. The cowboys who had made the drive were tired but in good spirits, and even Dutch Harrigan grudgingly admitted that Caroline had done a solid job leading the operation. On the ride back to the main ranch, Jake rode beside Caroline at the head of the group, and they talked quietly about plans for the next phase of work. But beneath the professional conversation, there were shared glances and small smiles that spoke of the connection growing between them, the anticipation of what would come once they returned and could begin to figure out how to move forward together. Thomas Rutherford was waiting on the porch when they rode in, and his weathered face broke into a broad smile as Caroline dismounted and walked up to give her report. "The cattle are settled in the summer pasture, Mr. Rutherford. We made good time and did not lose a single head. The men worked hard, and the operation went smoothly." "I knew it would," Thomas said with satisfaction. "I have been getting reports from the line camps, and everyone has been impressed with how you handled things. You have proven yourself beyond any doubt, Caroline. Pete would have been proud." The praise meant more than Caroline could express, and she felt her eyes sting with grateful tears. "Thank you, sir. That means the world to me." Over the following weeks, Caroline continued to prove her worth as foreman, making decisions that improved the ranch's efficiency and profitability while maintaining the high standards of animal care that Thomas valued. The men who had been skeptical gradually became supporters, won over by her consistent competence and her genuine concern for their welfare. She made sure every cowboy felt heard and valued, created work schedules that were fair and reasonable, and led by example rather than by intimidation. Through it all, Jake was her constant companion and secret love, finding moments to steal kisses behind the barn or take evening walks where they could talk freely about their hopes and dreams. They were careful to maintain proper boundaries in front of others, but the connection between them deepened with every passing day. Caroline found herself imagining a future with increasing clarity, picturing a small house on the ranch property where they could build a life together, children running through the fields and learning to love the land the way their parents did. The moment came to make their relationship public on a warm evening in late August when Thomas Rutherford called Caroline into his office after dinner. She went with some trepidation, unsure what the summons meant, and found the ranch owner sitting behind his desk with a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. "Sit down, Caroline," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I want to talk to you about something important." She sat, her back straight and her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Of course, sir. What is on your mind?" Thomas leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment before speaking. "You have exceeded every expectation I had when I promoted you to foreman. The ranch is running better than it has in years. The men respect you, and you have brought in innovations that have increased our profitability significantly. I could not be more pleased with your performance." Relief flooded through Caroline, followed quickly by pride. "Thank you, sir. I have tried my best to honor the faith you placed in me." "You have done that and more," Thomas agreed, "which is why I want to offer you a partnership stake in the Double R Ranch. My son has made it clear he has no interest in ranching, and I need someone I can trust to eventually take over operations when I am no longer able. I think you are that person, Caroline. I would like to offer you 10% ownership now with the option to increase that over time as you continue to prove yourself. What do you say?" Caroline felt her heart stop in her chest, felt the weight of shock and joy and disbelief crash over her like a wave. A partnership stake in one of the most successful ranches in Wyoming was beyond anything she had dreamed possible. A security and recognition that would change her entire life. "Mr. Rutherford, I do not know what to say. This is incredibly generous." "It is good business. Thomas corrected gently, and it is the right thing to do, so will you accept? Yes, Caroline said, her voice trembling with emotion. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for this opportunity. They shook hands on the agreement, and Thomas pulled out a bottle of whiskey to celebrate, pouring them each a small glass. As they toasted to the future of the Double R Ranch, Caroline felt like her life was finally falling into the shape she had always hoped for, a combination of professional success and personal fulfillment that had seemed impossible just a year ago. When she emerged from the office an hour later, she found Jake waiting outside, his expression anxious as he searched her face. Is everything all right? I saw him call you in and I was worried. Caroline could not contain her smile as she grabbed his hand and pulled him around the corner of the house where they would not be seen. Jake, he offered me a partnership, 10% ownership of the ranch with potential for more in the future. I am a partner now, not just a foreman. Jake's face split into a huge grin, and he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her deeply, pouring all of his pride and happiness into the connection. You deserve this, he said fiercely when they broke apart. You deserve everything good in this world, Caroline. I want to tell him about us, Caroline said suddenly, the decision forming even as she spoke the words. I am not just a foreman anymore. I am a partner, which changes the dynamic. I do not want to hide what I feel for you, Jake. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours. Jake's expression softened into something tender and awed. Are you sure? I do not want you to feel pressured or like you have to rush into anything. I am absolutely sure, Caroline said with conviction. I love you, Jake Morrison, and I want to build a life with you. No more hiding, no more pretending. If you are willing, I would like to tell Mr. Rutherford that we are together and that I intend to marry you. The look on Jake's face was worth everything. Pure joy mixed with love so intense it made Caroline's breath catch. I am more than willing, he said roughly. I would marry you tomorrow if you would have me. Hell, I would marry you tonight if we could find a preacher. You are everything I have ever wanted, Caroline, and I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. They went back into Thomas Rutherford's office together, hands clasped tightly, and Caroline announced their intention to marry. The ranch owner's reaction was not what she expected, his weathered face breaking into a knowing smile as he looked between them. I wondered when you two would stop dancing around each other, he said with amusement. I have seen the way you look at each other when you think no one is watching. I am happy for you both, truly. Jake is a good man, and you two will build a good life together. When is the wedding? They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in the nearest town, with all the ranch hands in attendance and Thomas Rutherford giving Caroline away since her own father could not be there. Caroline wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers from the prairie woven into her dark hair. Jake stood at the altar in his best suit, his gray eyes shining with emotion as he watched her walk down the aisle toward him, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was sweet and full of promise. Thomas had given them a piece of land on the eastern edge of the ranch property as a wedding gift, and Jake spent the fall building them a small house with help from the other cowboys. It was modest but sturdy, with a wide porch that looked out over rolling grassland and a bedroom with windows that let in the morning sun. Caroline worked alongside him whenever her duties as foreman allowed, and they filled the house with simple, practical furniture that they chose together. Their first year of marriage was full of hard work and simple joys, learning to navigate life as partners both in the ranch operations and in their private world. Caroline continued to excel as foreman and partial owner, implementing new breeding programs and improving the ranch infrastructure while Jake served as her most trusted advisor and supporter. They faced challenges together, from harsh weather to difficult personnel decisions, but they always emerged stronger, their trust in each other deepening with every obstacle they overcame. When Caroline discovered she was pregnant the following spring, Jake's reaction was everything she could have hoped for, his face lighting up with wonder and his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach as if he could feel the tiny life growing there. "We are going to have a baby," he whispered in awe. "Caroline, we are going to be parents." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "We are going to have a baby, and I am terrified and thrilled and so incredibly happy." Jake held her close and pressed kisses to her hair, her temples, her cheeks. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he murmured. "This child is going to be so loved, so fortunate to have you." Their son was born in early winter, a squalling, red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They named him Thomas Jacob Morrison, after the ranch owner who had given Caroline her chance and the father who would teach him to love the land. Jake cried when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his weathered face as he cradled the tiny bundle against his chest and whispered promises about the life they would build together. Caroline took a month away from her foreman duties to recover and bond with the baby, but she found herself restless and eager to return to the work she loved. Thomas Rutherford understood and was supportive, helping to arrange for a woman from town to come stay with them during the days so that Caroline could continue managing the ranch while still being close enough to nurse Thomas Jacob whenever he needed her. It was exhausting trying to balance motherhood and her responsibilities, but Caroline felt fulfilled in a way she never had before, her life rich with purpose and love. The years that followed brought more children. 2 daughters who were as bold and adventurous as their mother, and a second son who was quieter and more contemplative like his father. The small house on the eastern edge of the property expanded to accommodate the growing family, with Jake adding rooms and a bigger porch where they could all gather in the evenings. Caroline continued to work as foreman and partner, her children growing up understanding that their mother was both a rancher and a nurturer, that strength and tenderness could coexist in one person. Jake proved to be an involved and loving father, teaching his children to ride almost as soon as they could walk and instilling in them the same respect for the land and animals that he and Caroline shared. The older boys and girls on the ranch doted on the Morrison children, and Thomas Jacob grew up surrounded by cowboys who taught him to rope and brand and all the skills he would need to eventually run a ranch of his own. When Thomas Rutherford passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, he left the remainder of the ranch to Caroline in his will, recognizing that she had been more of a daughter to him than his own son who had settled permanently in Boston. Caroline wept at the funeral, grieving the loss of the man who had believed in her when no one else would, who had given her the chance that changed her entire life. She stood beside Jake as they lowered Thomas into the ground. Her children gathered around her and the entire ranch community there to pay their respects to a good man who had lived his life with integrity and fairness. Caroline took over full ownership of the Double R Ranch and continued to run it with the same principles Thomas had instilled, treating her workers fairly and managing the land sustainably so that it would be productive for generations to come. Jake worked beside her as he always had, no longer her second in command but her full partner in every sense of the word, and together they built the Double R into one of the most respected operations in Wyoming. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning from both parents the skills needed to thrive in the demanding life of ranching. Thomas Jacob showed particular aptitude for the work, combining his mother's intelligence and his father's steady temperament into a leadership style that earned respect from everyone he worked with. The daughters proved equally capable, shocking some of the more traditional neighboring ranchers by participating fully in all aspects of ranch work and showing no interest in pursuing more conventional feminine paths. As Caroline approached her 50th birthday, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a dispossessed young woman with nothing but determination to a successful ranch owner with a loving family and the respect of her entire community. She thought about that day when Thomas Rutherford had stood on his porch and announced her promotion, about Jake's steady support and eventual declaration of love, about all the challenges she had overcome and the joys she had experienced. One evening, she and Jake sat together on their porch watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to build and protect. Their youngest daughter was practicing her roping in the yard while Thomas Jacob oversaw some repairs on the main barn in the distance. Jake's hair had gone silver at the temples, and there were deep lines around his eyes from decades of squinting into the sun. But to Caroline, he was as handsome as the day she had married him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly, taking his hand in hers. "Giving up the chance to run your own place, settling for being married to the boss instead of being the boss yourself?" Jake turned to look at her with such love and contentment in his gray eyes that she felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "This life we have built together, this family, this ranch, everything we have accomplished, that is all worth more than any title or position ever could be. You earned your place fair and square, Carolyn, and I have been honored to stand beside you every step of the way. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Caroline leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him and the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me, for supporting me, for building this beautiful life with me. I love you too," Jake murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Always have, always will." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had created. The Double R Ranch would continue for generations, passing from their hands to their children's and beyond, a legacy built on hard work, integrity, and the kind of love that could weather any storm. Caroline had earned her place through determination and skill, had proven herself beyond any doubt, but in the end, the greatest prize had not been the promotion or the partnership or even the ranch itself. The greatest prize had been finding a man who saw her worth, who loved her for exactly who she was, and who stood beside her as an equal partner in building a life that mattered. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Caroline felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude wash over her. She had started with nothing and built everything, had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, had found love in the most unexpected place. The ranch hand had gotten promoted over all the men, and the cowboy had said she earned it fair and square now, and that moment of recognition had opened the door to a future more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. This was her legacy, written in the land she had protected and the family she had raised and the love that would endure long after she was gone. This was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to dream, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here.